Welcome to The Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new infecting horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs on FX at 10/9 Central. I'm your host, Blair Knight Graves, from showratings.tv, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, who's also from showratings.tv. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLivesTV and at KyleLivesTV, and follow this podcast's Twitter handle at TheStrainPod. How you doing today, Kyle?
Oh, Blair. I just watched an episode of Under the Dome, so naturally I'm feeling terrible. This really was an infecting episode of The Strain, for a variety of reasons.
For reasons that I don't think you're so pleased with.
On the whole, I'm going to say no. There were some things, certainly, aspects of this episode that I liked. But overall, it got some issues.
All right. Well, for our listeners, just so you know, today we are discussing Season 1, Episode 6, Occultation. Occultation?
I've never tried saying that word out loud.
I have not either. Occultation.
Okay.
Written by Justin Britt Gibson, which was the episode in which the apocalypse begins.
Wait. Haven't you said, the apocalypse begins, like for 5 straight episodes now? I don't understand where we are in the apocalypse.
Indeed I have, but I think that the public outcry of the apocalypse begins in this episode.
Does it? Because that's one of my issues.
All right. Well, before we get to the end, we should probably start at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good
right?
policy.
Okay. So before we get to all of that, let's discuss the opening sequence, which I really enjoyed. Which was sort of like a shot from outer space.
Yes.
As the broadcasts of all of the very standard, there is a natural occurrence happening. Could it be the sign of the apocalypse? Broadcasts sort of happening throughout
half sarcastic, half like radio disc jockey, which I thought was really good.
I do too, because that's something that we hear every single time that there's an eclipse, or every single time there's a supermoon, or there are shooting stars, or earthquakes, or anything that happens. You know, the news anchors go, could this be the end?
Yes.
And ultimately it never is. And that's what that was a nice little shoulder rub.
I will say, one of the disc jockeys in this montage of radio clips said, described the streets of New York as pickpockets and perverts are doing their thing. Now, I know what pickpockets thing is. I'm worried about what perverts doing their thing means in the context of the streets of New York. This is a really worrisome start, that line. It's sort of a weird thing.
It's very, who's that? Is it a televangelist or a radio guy? Bill something?
I don't know.
Oh, just there's a right-wing political figure on the radio that I can't remember his name for the life of me. Bill O'Reilly? Is it Bill O'Reilly?
Oh, you're talking about the Fox News TV show host, Bill O'Reilly?
Yeah, he would say something like that.
You are absolutely correct. They should have gotten Bill O'Reilly to deliver the line. It would have been flawless. You're right. That is something that has definitely been said on Fox News 9 times in the last 24 hours.
Yes, exactly. Especially with everything that's happening in the world right now.
Yeah, which I'm going to really try to not get into in the context of this episode.
Oh, I'm going to.
Oh,
I already know where, at what point, so be prepared, everybody.
Get ready for some #hot takes, because we're bringing you all the world news along with reviews of The Strain.
Oh boy.
It's our podcast motto. Now we're talking about... No, it's really not.
It's really not.
It's definitely not.
Okay, so let's jump right in. After the commercial break, then we had Eichhorst with that really weird scene where he just kept a guy in a room and then ate him.
Yeah, is that... First question, because I was writing my review and I, for the life of me, couldn't recognize that guy. Is that really just a random person?
I know, I read your review, and as far as I can tell, that was nobody I recognized.
Right. This is the 6th episode. How is it possible to have a scene like that and not have established that guy as being someone in this world? Later on, there's a scene where Abe takes a taxi, and he has like a little back and forth with the taxi driver, and the scene lasts 30 seconds, and that taxi driver, I don't expect to see him again. We might, but who knows. But it's like, why wasn't that guy like some minor character in this world who had like a 3-minute story that wrapped up, and now to make this scene work on a separate level? Because it's like, it's such a wasted opportunity to have that be a random person. Like,
Yeah.
this seems like a really basic thing that, like, if you're gonna do a scene like that in episode 6, throw this guy out in episode 3, have him like be the waiter or something at a restaurant, and then he comes back and it's all, we recognize who he is, and it's like an extra level. Like, this is basic stuff, and maybe we're all just missing it. But I know everyone on Twitter's reaction, and certainly my reaction, was, I don't recognize this guy, because we just assume, having watched television, that this guy should be someone we know.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I believe, it should have been an air controller or an FBI agent or a member of the CDC, or anybody that we could possibly recognize. And it's, somebody, or even like a doctor who helped Palmer. That's what I was like. I was thinking maybe this guy like is involved with Palmer and he gave him a liver transplant or something. But like, there's no indication.
Yes.
There wasn't like a quick flashback. There wasn't him using the guy's name or the guy saying, "Do you know who I am?" or like any of the tropes that you've come to expect from a scene like that.
Or if it was someone, and I'm not ruling out the possibility that this person really was introduced previously and we're just not remembering him, but if it was someone who was introduced previously, then that previous scene should have been more memorable. Like it should, that person in that situation should be someone who were like, "Oh no, him!" It should have been
Right.
someone who was like a minor character that we kind of liked and who made just a tiny little impact that we would remember him when he's now getting tortured by Eichhorst. And what was on a visceral level, a very interesting scene and fun scene and scary scene.
Well, it was really fun because of how whimsical Eichhorst is. We use
Yes.
that word a lot for him on this podcast,
Yes.
but like he has this presence that I don't think I've ever I haven't seen a character in a horror show have before. Like, you see I would say like he's kind of whimsical almost in the way that Eric is on True Blood. But he's much more terrifying because Eric is obviously supposed to be a sexy character, for those of you who don't watch True Blood. And Eichhorst is obviously just like this old decrepit vampire who is just like, he has a presence, he's got a swag. Like,
yes, very much so. Infinite swag.
But infinite swag. Immortal swag.
Exactly.
But like, the thing that I think that usually works about these types of horror scenes that you see sort of in the gore porn genre of like the Saw movies and the Hostel movies and things like that, like Eli Roth type stuff, is what usually works is, even though those movies are not effective necessarily at getting you emotionally invested in the characters who are being tortured.
Oh goodness, though.
But it's always very hard to watch those scenes and sad because you do have a background with those characters.
Exactly.
Like, that's what makes those scenes powerful. And this was really cool and really well done, and it made me like go, yeah, I love Eichhorst. I love it when he does crazy shit. But like, I didn't really like. I didn't feel anything in the scene because it felt like a throwaway because I didn't care about that character.
And that's going to be a running theme throughout this episode of the podcast, so buckle up. Because in my review, which you can read on showratings.tv, and by the way, rate this episode on showratings.tv too. We forget, like, the main goal of our site is that you come on and you write what you feel. So if you agree with us or disagree with us, rate this episode on showratings.tv. But in my review, I sort of go through everything I like about this episode, and then the next paragraph, I go through all the reasons that those scenes were undercut by the way that the show just bumbles its storytelling. And this is an example of that. Like, it would have been so easy to make this scene work on every level, and instead it only works on the "this is cool" level. And, it seems so basic. And this show in general feels to me like a show that is made by someone who's never done television before. And I know, I believe Carlton Cuse is involved. Like, he's the actual showrunner.
Hmm.
From Lost. So
From Lost.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a little bit alarming that he would oversee something like this. But just the storytelling on the strain feels like it's being done by a rookie, and it really, I think, in this episode manifested itself in an unfortunate way in a lot of the stories.
I definitely agree. So I said previously that this episode was written by Justin Britt Gibson, who I did a little bit of research, and as far as I can tell, this is the first time he's ever written for a show.
Oh,
Um, and he was a script supervisor for previous episodes and a script editor for previous episodes of The Strain, but this is the first episode that he wrote. But I couldn't find any background in any other shows. And obviously, again, you guys can correct us if you want. You can tweet at me if I'm incorrect. But unlike last week's episode, which I enjoyed a lot,
yes,
which had been written by somebody who won awards for Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad.
So
Yes,
yes, and who had written the X-Files and the Lone Gunmen
right.
and Mad Men. So I think that probably another issue that they're having is they're having seasoned writers working with rookie writers. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, internet. If I'm wrong, but this episode felt like rookie storytelling to me.
Yes, and I don't want to put it all at the writer's feet, because I think
Right,
that a
exactly.
lot of it has to do with the flimsy characterization in previous episodes, and there's only so much you can work with. But having said that, the structural elegance of last week's episode, which we talked about on this podcast, where there was a real logic to the events within that episode, and a real sort of rising action, and
Hmm.
the way that we opened with these stories that appeared to have nothing to do with the vampires, and then we closed with them being invaded by vampires. There was a certain mirroring of the show's overall theme, and it just felt like an episode that took everything that the strain is working with and did the best that it could with that material. And this episode felt more like the kind of episode that got the strain in this trouble in the first place, where
Yeah.
we're really relying hard on these flimsy characters, and no effort is being made to connect the dots in a meaningful way, the way that it happened last week.
Right, exactly. I think that's a perfect way of explaining it. Um, so I guess we should go on to the next, to the other things that occurred
Yeah,
in this episode, though,
sure.
which, of course, I'm sure is going to be your favorite plot point,
Uh oh.
which is F getting the FBI called on him.
Oh, wait, the FBI? Huh?
Oh,
Uh oh. No.
I'm not, I'm not giving it to you. I'm
No.
not.
Oh, fair enough.
No.
I don't give myself any points.
But you've previously stated that there's a bad taste in your mouth whenever there's like the family drama, whenever we have to deal with
Yeah.
the Sears manager Matt and his escapades with F's family. This was sort of like the apex of that.
Yeah, this was, I would say, the nadir of that line of storytelling that the strain has embarked upon. This was something. This was real 24 business right here, and I know I've said that about a few episodes so far. Not for the last couple weeks though, but I mean, this entire episode, not just F's story, was the theme of this episode was our heroes warning their loved ones and their loved ones not listening to them. Right? That was the
Yes.
the the story that occurred in every main plot, and that is really problematic on the face of it. Like right off the bat, you know that's a bad idea because, and I try to express this in the review, which is that I'm no longer as concerned with whether this is realistic behavior or not. I think that that's like a debatable thing. Like it's clear that the strain has this mission to show the audience that humans are willfully ignorant and that, like ostriches, at the first sign of trouble we're going to bury our heads in the sand. Like that is the message of the show that's being hammered home week after week. um I'm not debating whether that message is accurate or not, because that's a much bigger discussion. What I am asserting is that it is a terrible message to watch play out on screen.
Mm.
It just creates frustration, because what it ends up becoming is a bunch of idiots on screen, and everyone on the strain except the select few characters is an absolute idiot, and they have to be, because the show is so hellbent on advancing its message And I never thought I would be saying this about the strain, but it's almost a message show in that way, where it's the same way that the leftovers is, to be honest. It's like
Ugh.
this idea that it's. I know I'm invoking a show that neither of us likes, but that's sort of the point, which is that it's. I don't know what acts that Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan have to grind, but it seems to me like it would be much more interesting dramatically if the world was putting up a better fight. You know, if
Hmm.
it's just this weird thing, and I don't want to bring up the events of this week in the real world, but I think now I have to, which is I feel like the strain is really feeding in to this blame the victim mentality, which is that the
Hmm.
strain is very, very concerned with the idea that this vampire apocalypse is the human's fault. You know,
Hmm.
I feel like every effort the show is making to say like, oh, the government officials are so stupid and the police officers are so incompetent and the FBI are only concerned about this silly little case that won't matter once night falls. These are all attempts to basically say, listen, humans were building their own destruction. The vampires are just sort of a functional like way to do the job for them. You know, like it's designed to say like we brought this upon ourselves, and if only people had listened to Abe and F, none of this would have happened because the master's plan relies on human ignorance. And it's such a it's such a dim message to be sending that like that the show feels the need to make it humanity's own fault for its downfall exclusively. Like there's no like resistance beyond like our two main characters, and that's really disappointing, and I find it really disheartening, frankly, to watch on screen and to be beat over the head by week after week.
Well, especially given, yes.
Right, yeah, and I should tie that
Ooh,
around because I made the
yeah.
comment, but it's you just see this like people are so eager to attribute things to the victim. In any case, the victim people are just dying for an excuse to say the victim is at fault. The person who something bad is happening to is at fault. In this case, in the show, humanity is the victim, and the show is claiming that humanity is at fault for its own demise instead of allowing us what I would consider the satisfaction of watching humanity fight the vampires. We're just watching them trip over their own feet and fall on their face, and as the vampires really do nothing, and just sort of let humanity fail and implode in on itself.
Well, first of all, for our listeners who may be listening to this in future episodes, the events of this week that we are discussing are the Michael Brown protests that are happening in Ferguson, Missouri. You can look that up,
Yeah.
which is a perfect example of the government acting as though it's incompetent.
Yes.
Sorry,
Right. But
that's my political view.
no,
I'm
no.
not gonna bring
And,
it into our
but
podcast.
that's okay. This is the point that I wanted to make in my review, which is that I am
Yeah.
not saying that this is not what would happen necessarily. Although I feel like the show is going to absurd lengths to show incompetence, whereas we are now seeing in real time incompetence play out, and it is much less pronounced than it is on this show. It is much more insidious and much more it's just not as blatant as it is on this show, where like the health and human services person is being bribed by Palmer and eating out of his hand, and it's like it's just so over the head. But the point is, I'm not debating the reality of the situation. It's that it's so unpleasant to watch on screen. It's so just it just makes me frustrated and upset by the show when I'm watching everyone behave like an idiot. You know, when I watch, and I'm jumping ahead here, but when I watch a guy wearing a bloody apron rampaging through the streets with blood in his mouth, and the FBI guys in the car saying, "Don't get involved. We don't have to worry about this." Like, what is that? Like, what is that? I mean, and when that aforementioned murderous vampire monster, having killed any number of people in the streets, makes his way down an alley and then is beaten over the head by Gus, who stops him, and then Gus is arrested. In what reality does that make any sense, or is that satisfying in any way? That's just frustrating. And that's
That's
my problem.
that's so fascinating because that was the one moment. Like, I agree with you about the FBI agents. I thought that they weren't making any sense. So this is the final sequence of the episode, when the FBI agents decide not to become involved when the vampire's running down the streets, opening a car door and eating a woman alive.
Yes.
Uh, I thought that everything that happened there was strange, except for the fact that amid chaos, the police would knock over the men of color in the alley.
Okay.
Like
Yes.
that. Sorry, that's
Fair
immediately, and
enough.
and that's probably me being influenced again by the Michael Brown riots that
Yes.
are happening right now. But my immediate reaction was like, "Oh yeah, of course they see two people of color."
Yeah.
Like, and there's a bunch of like chaos happening. Let's pick up the people of color.
I would
So,
say this is New York, so it's not like the streets are filled with white people, right? This is a
right,
diverse city. So these weren't the only two people of color out on the streets. I presume they
no,
weren't rounding them up. I
no, but New York is known for its stop and frisk laws and
sure.
all of that.
No,
Like,
I'm
it's
not. I'm certainly not. Yeah, I'm aware. But what I'm saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation was they were arrested for hitting the guy over the head with a pipe, right? Why else would they
I
have been arrested? Were the
I
I,
I thought it was because of the chaos that was happening,
that
and
seems I mean we had no other context of the police arresting people because of chaos. When they were arrested, they weren't doing anything illegal. Phoenix was just trying to get a worm out of his hand, which is going to
which got in.
yes, which got in and is going to lead to bad things. I think we can safely conclude. Um, but I mean, again, everyone is running. There's chaos on the streets. I just if I mean, I guess we'll probably find out next week why they were arrested, but I was under the very strong influence that they were arrested because they hit the guy over the head with a pipe.
Hmm.
And which is patently absurd.
Yes.
which is ridiculous to a degree that I can't even imagine, but it's the only reasonable explanation I can come to after this episode. Because I mean, if the police were just arresting random people on the streets, then you think they would have had a 5-second scene where they showed that happening. You know, like just establish it, right? Like,
Right.
let's see it. But I mean, I just based on the evidence I have to go on, I assumed they were arrested for assaulting the murderous vampire.
I think that I mean, as we've been talking about, authority are painted as completely incompetent in this series,
Yes,
and probably more competent than the following, but only just barely.
that's a good
But
thing.
they're painted as incompetent, and perhaps it is the confusion of the chaos and the confusion of the not like, yeah, he hit a guy but he was still involved, and we're going to act first and question later, which is very much how the FBI agents were acting with F. And
Yes.
I mean, speak about, okay, okay, going back, rewinding.
Sure.
Once F gets arrested, he's put into, an interrogation room, and he gets struck twice
Yeah.
by the FBI agent who's interrogating him,
Who?
which was just absurd to me.
Yeah.
Like, I could not believe that character.
I mean,
um,
he has. I don't understand any of this. Like, okay, so they know they. Oh, I'm just trying to unpack where we are with F, because they had footage of him dragging the body. By the way, the body with a giant appendage sticking out of it, of the pilot, who F,
yes.
Nora, and Jim all killed, because he was attacking them because he's a vampire monster. They, where did they drag that? Well, they dragged it to the lab to do an autopsy of it, right? To
Yes.
like an underground lab, and on that journey is when they got videotaped. I presume they just
Yes.
left him there, and then in this episode, Icarus enlisted Gus and Jim and Phoenix. That was the body,
Felix.
right? And Felix?
Felix.
I thought his name was
Felix.
Phoenix. I like Phoenix more. Um, Felix. To drag that was the pilot's body, right?
Yeah.
That they were
Yes. That
clearing.
was the pilot's body that they were dressing up in their
Yes.
uh, their nurse garbs.
So if the government, as we know, saw F dragging that body around, why did nobody claim the body between then and now? Because this is the next day. if they are pressing charges against F, you'd think the first thing they would do is locate the body that they have video of him dragging into the basement.
It's the same reason that they haven't freaked out over all 220 passengers going missing. Like it's this communication barrier that I believe that the show writers are forgetting, that they are forgetting the reality of 200 people go missing from a morgue.
Yeah.
Oh man, I bet the CDC is going to care about that.
Yeah. Yes. And
Um,
the show seems absurdly committed to trying to explain the little things and I would say the big things like that the Dutch Velder scene where like okay it's like okay all the internet is going down we need to explain that and then this one like you could just see someone in the writers room saying guys there's a body there we have to explain that it's like okay what do we do all right let's have Ikehurst tell Gus to get the body out of there which is like it's like putting a band-aid on an arm that's fallen off like a like it's putting a band-aid on a decapitated neck like there
it,
are so many logic issues with the show that to spend 5 minutes addressing the body and disposing of it to apparently close a loophole is so ridiculous.
it's it's so funny to me all of the points that you're making right now. For the listeners who this might be your first episode, the biggest difference between Kyle and
Yes,
I
yes, yes.
is that I've read the books and he has not.
Our traditional
Uh,
disclaimer.
yes, and it's the only difference between the two of us.
Absolutely. Very.
Um,
That's it.
is you have been making points that I have decidedly remained silent on
I've heard, yes, and I assume why that too.
because because I recognize that this episode is the setup for a lot of things that are about to go down,
Okay.
and a lot of things that I'm struggling. I'm this is an interesting moment in the podcast for us because thus far we've been able to move forward fine with me having this information, but this is a point where I am struggling because there was a moment in the final sequence where I was with my roommates and I was really excited because I got really really scared and I thought something was about to happen and then it totally didn't.
Oh.
I was like, oh man, I have to wait till next week for that to happen. And I think that a lot of the complaints that you're making, and I have said this in every episode, is like a lot of information that I'm able to fill in because I've read the books. A lot of information that saying all these things, I'm thinking, wow, that really doesn't make any sense.
Right.
The way that it was portrayed on the television series really doesn't make any sense. And I can understand how it can be confusing and difficult and make you have like very little faith in the show and in humanity.
Yeah.
Um,
I would just say
yeah,
the show needs to stand on its own. Like there
yeah,
can't be where you have to read the books to understand like where it's all going. Like that's just seems like a basic tenet is that your TV show should work as a TV show. And this episode really, I mean, and I should say I liked aspects of this episode, which I wrote about in my review. I think I gave it like a 6.8. Like I didn't like kill it. But boy, just the it just doesn't work. Like
yeah.
storytelling wise, the storytelling doesn't work in this episode and man, it was rough. It was rough for me.
It was rough for me too. I think particularly I finally had that moment where I started to agree with you about how poorly Nora is being written.
Yeah.
Which the last couple of weeks, Kyle and I have been bickering about this because I've
Yes.
felt like Nora's character makes sense to me because she's now been traumatized, and it's difficult for her. She's the youngest member of the crew that has had to decapitate vampires
Sure.
and deal with all this. She's the most junior person, and she's the most fragile person, unfortunately, because she is a female character and she's been written to be a fragile female character.
Yes.
That being said, I've always seen her as a strong character who faltered when she saw an 8-year-old get her head
Hmm.
taken off, which is a terrifying thing. But then in this episode, everything she did just angered me.
Yeah.
And I hate it. I really, really hate it. The way that she had a line with her mother that really bothered me. She's like, "I wish I could forget the things the way you do."
Yeah.
And I thought that was so.
I say in other words, I wish I had Alzheimer's.
Right, which is that is such a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Like that is not a line that a strong character has.
No.
That is a line of a character who runs away from her problems and who isn't going to be there to fight the good fight.
Yeah, well, and
Uh,
as evidenced by her behavior these last 2 weeks, because she knew about this, the same that F did. She knew that this was a virus that was going to take over the world. Like that is its goal. Like she was in the room when F made that conclusion, and F clearly stood by it. She then ran away and spent the last 2 episodes with her mother, doing nothing. And
yes.
so it's like these are, as F said, these are the crucial hours, and she spent them just hiding with her mother, doing nothing. And so, I mean, what are we supposed to think about that character? Like I said last week, it's hard to make a character strong when she is horribly and decisively wrong. It's very hard for a
Hmm.
character to be both strong and just as wrong as you can possibly be. And that was Nora, because she didn't believe F, and now, look at her, she shows up in Abe's pawn shop, ready to fight the fight with F. It's like, well, what were you doing for the last 2 episodes? You weren't fighting the
Yeah.
fight, and now you realize that F was right, and you're going to go join his fight, and you already missed the chance to stop this whole thing. So,
Yes.
like, like, are we supposed to think Nora's competent after that? Because I certainly don't.
No, now I'm fully under the impression that she is
She's
a
weak.
weak character who will be a detriment to the cause.
Speaking of
Like that.
speaking of detriments, she had to drag her mother around all week, which is a cool look for a show if they want us to hate an old lady with Alzheimer's. Because it's like her mother's like, almost opening the door when the FBI agents are there to get her, and
Yeah.
complaining as they walk through the streets. And it's like, why'd you have to make us hate the old lady? Like, she's a sweet old lady. Like, why is she being written as this ball and chain that's just ruining Nora's life? Like, it's like, do you have to make us hate that character this straight? Because
I think
yeah, yeah,
decidedly they do.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
is which is interesting because they're setting up all of these relationships for you to care about. One of which ended in this week's episode when Vas found his the girl that he
Oh
likes
yeah, we really cared
becoming a
about that
vampire.
relationship. All
Well,
all 15 seconds of it.
it was it was played up through no less than 3 episodes. Like it was an established relationship, even though it only had glimpses. Even there were only glimpses. He clearly cared about that character, and we were set up to feel badly for him when he was forced to kill her.
Well,
And my greater point is,
uh-huh.
I think that I care more about that relationship than most of the other relationships that our main cast has. And we know that all of their other relationships are going to be difficult given that they're all separated throughout as the apocalypse comes in. So that's all that I'm saying.
To me, if you weren't using the word relationship to describe those two characters' interaction, I would assume that she is a hot girl that he is trying to sleep with. I had no sense that they were anything other than coworkers who found each other attracted and had a kind of like season 1 of The Office Jim and Pam vibe going, where maybe she has a boyfriend, but they have little flirty interactions and they totally get around well. Like, I had no sense at all that they have any kind of relationship beyond that.
Well, I didn't mean like
Okay.
relationship, but I meant as in there was a loss to be had when he had to kill her.
Well,
Like
he certainly didn't feel it, which is fine by me. He sort of quickly opened the blinds, which I like.
you
That's
don't
strength.
I thought he didn't feel it. I thought he certainly showed that he felt it.
Oh, in
And
his own
like
way, I should say.
it, yeah, it was established that he was going to care about that when he found out that she had a kid, when he looked at her phone.
Yeah.
And
Oh gosh, I thought he was just snooping so that he could like know what he's getting into when he hooks up with her inevitably. Like I didn't I don't know. I didn't see any depth at all of that relationship. They had 30-second scenes where they kind of sort of flirted with each other at work. Like that's the extent of the relationship that we saw.
all right, well, I cared about it and I thought it was sad. I'm sorry.
Fair point. Fair point, by the way. If you're making, I mean, I should say I don't disagree with your point that it was better laid out than the other relationships on the show necessarily. Even
Like
even
it
holding to
it
that.
was it was simple and easy, and I didn't have any reason to dislike that character.
Yes. And
You know, which at this point, what do we have? We have plenty of reasons to dislike
everybody,
all of the all the characters that are in the lives of our main characters,
yes,
right? We've got the Alzheimer mother.
yeah.
We've got the drug addict brother. We've got Matt, the Sears
Oh
guy.
my gosh, Matt! What a tour de force this week for Matt. Starting with calling the FBI on F, and then trying in vain to comfort Kelly, and then manning the Sears break room, and apparently charging headlong into a couple vampires standing in the hallway. Real powerhouse effort from Matt this week.
Absolutely. But my greater point is there wasn't any reason for like the writing was so simple between Vass and that girl, that nameless girl, as far as I'm concerned. It was so simple and such a straightforward relationship. This is my biggest gripe with the strain. You're supposed to care about the relationships that everybody has, and I don't.
I feel like you made my point by pointing out that she was not given a name. That might be an issue.
All right. But okay, but I want to talk about we've been ragging on this for a little while. I want to talk about there were very strong moments in this week's episode, and I would like to talk about them.
Thing.
I don't know if we agree about the same moments.
I can tell you right now, we don't.
Okay, what were your strong moments?
I don't have any. So the fact that you mentioned that there were strong moments, it immediately means that I disagree with you.
All right. Okay.
No. I should say, I should say I thought there were moments that I enjoyed that I could have enjoyed more if they were better done. I guess it's my yes.
Okay.
I felt strong was a little strong. I just strong is a tough word because the show has had strong moments in the past, and I don't want to bring them down. Like it's had genuinely good moments on previous episodes. I feel like every good moment in this episode has an asterisk by it.
Well, then let's talk about the ones that I thought were strong. In many scenes that I thought were probably stronger than some of the Anne Marie material from Ansel and Anne Marie, which was material that I was not very fond of.
Not a hype.
Especially given that was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I thought every sequence with Gus and Felix was strong. I thought that the relationship between those two was built very well in this episode, and I thought that their little adventure of going off and meeting Icarus, and then Gus trying to get in fisticuffs with Icarus, and Icarus just taking him down.
Yeah.
And then them destroying, getting rid of a body with Jim Kent, so connecting some stories by bringing some characters together, and then ultimately ending with, Felix becoming infected and Gus having to kill the big bad scary vampire that's rampaging through the streets. I personally thought that entire sequence was probably the strongest of the episode. I enjoyed that immensely. I don't know how you felt.
Counterpoint. I believe Gus and Felix's relationship, I still want to call him Phoenix, by the way. Gus and Felix's relationship could be summed up as Gus is always right, Felix is always wrong. Unless you have any compelling evidence to the contrary. It appears to be the case, and every time they disagree, Gus is right and Felix is wrong. The reasons for them having to dump that body when people are being attacked every night by vampires in mass seems peculiar to me. It seems weird why that body was still there when an arrest warrant has already been put out for F. You would think the body would have been, I don't know, investigated in a way. Since they knew where it was because they have him on security camera footage. So I don't understand the reason behind all of that. I very much liked the scene that you talked about where Icarus very casually subdues Gus, and I cannot believe that Felix survived that scene. Felix, as the fat friend who is always wrong, seemed destined to die during that scene. If I know anything about movies, somehow got out of it alive. Unfortunately, probably will not make it through next week's episode alive based on the worm that crawled into his wrist. But it was a good run for Fat Felix. but overall, like I liked aspects of it. But again, like the storytelling reasons for that entire thing to happen, and then he's just on the street and runs into the guy that we saw earlier, the bloody apron medical examiner who's been murdering people with his giant tongue appendage, bonks him over the head with that, and then gets arrested, which I thought was for that, which is completely ridiculous. So
Right.
overall, it was what I would consider a nonsensical journey that was somewhat entertaining to watch.
The show creators are certainly struggling to bring all the characters together. I think that's what I want to say about that sequence, because there's no reason for them to have been in the streets except for that they are, they are supposed to eventually, all the stories are supposed to connect eventually. So
Yeah.
So I think that was a sloppy way to get Gus in the same place as F.
Right, we just have the same
That's
place, same
all,
time. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I don't like there. You're right. There was no, hey, we're done dumping the body. Let's get back in our street clothes and go to New York.
Yes.
Like there was not that moment. So I'll agree with you there. But I thought, and I think it's almost certainly in the performances, that even though it's absolutely right, you're correct that it is like the thin handsome friend with the fat goofy friend, and the thin handsome guy is always correct. A huge trope in television and film. I think that there's some chemistry between those two. And
really?
they and the actors who play Gus and Felix, and I enjoy watching them together. That's what I think. That's where I'm at.
That's fair, but I'm going to criticize that aspect of the show, because why couldn't they be funny? Why couldn't they have a funny chemistry? Like, I know Gus is like a gangster and all that, but he also very tenderly loves his mother. So he's not like this hardened, guy who's not capable of joking around. And Felix, I'm guessing, is his cousin. I think we landed on that after last week.
His cousin.
He's his cousin. So couldn't those two have a more like jovial kind of, like, this is a show that so lacks any kind of humor, and that would seem like a good opportunity for it to get those two, family members together. And you've got the fat guy who's already sort of naturally funny, and I wish that those parts were written so that when they were interacting, it felt a little more like they were busting each other's balls rather than just straightforward, we got to move this body. We gotta, it's just they talk to me. Those two talk to each other like everyone else on the show talks to everyone else. Like I don't hear any strong like difference in tone between those two interactions and any other interactions on the show.
I feel like in their introduction as cousins, which I think was 2 or 3 episodes ago, I felt like that there was some of that joking around and that boyish behavior. And I think that we are sloppily rushing to the finish line of getting everybody together in the same place, and that's ultimately, we are losing opportunities for dialogue and character development because we really have to get them all together.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately the biggest problem right now.
I mean, they're doing they're not even halfway through the season. It's a 13-episode season. They're doing 7 more episodes. Like, how? They've talked about the show being 5 seasons long. Why in the world would you have to rush if your show is 5 seasons long? Like, that's it's a lot of episodes.
It's 3 to 5.
Okay.
It's 3 to 5 seasons long. The final book could be between 1 and 3 seasons, depending on how the network feels.
But then but still, it's flexible. I mean, it seems like establishing your world is not the time to be rushing through points. Like a lot of this stuff feels rushed, but then a lot of it also feels like it's glacially paced, which is what I wanted to get to, which is that
everything with F is glacially paced.
Exactly. And people's realization, the world's realization that the apocalypse is happening, because I remember you tweeting in episode 2, the apocalypse begins, and I was like, yeah, here we go, it's happening, like the world is coming apart. And yet here we are, having finished episode 6, and we still have FBI agents arresting F for suspected murder and holding him overnight as if nothing is wrong. And that, considering what happened the previous night, where we saw at an old age home, Nora's and her mother, people were being murdered in the hallway by vampire monsters. Are you telling me that no word of that got out? And I know, by the way, I know Dutch Velders is involved, and the internet and the cell phones aren't working great. Are you telling me that no one walked to the police station and said, "Yo, people are being murdered by vampires. Guess what? Vampires exist and they're here." Like, did no one say that? Like, what is? How do law
Yeah,
enforcement not know about it by now? We have seen people murdered in the streets.
yeah, I found that incredibly problematic, just given the fact that Nora escaped from it.
Right!
And I mean,
How
I
did
think
she not go to the police?
we're right. We're probably left to believe that those monsters killed any witnesses that could have reported to the police. But no, Nora's actions to go home and take a nap certainly don't make
Wait,
any
so you're
sense.
telling me there is an old age home filled with hundreds of bodies, and no one like walked by during the next day before the eclipse and it was like, "Hey, everyone's dead." Everyone's dead. Like, I'm gonna run to the police station by foot because this is an enormous thing. Like,
Well, but like, look what happened with Abe's character in this episode. He went by where there had been a wake
ooh, that
for
was
one
good.
of the dead passengers. Speaking of another strong sequence,
That was good.
um, and what were there? I mean, I don't think we saw all of them, but there were probably 10 vampires in the basement of people who had been at the wake. I think the understanding is that when you see a vampire, unless you're one of our heroes, you're probably going to get eaten by that vampire.
It,
Like,
yeah,
because, I mean, they know to avoid the stingers, but I think that most people do not carry the correct weapons to protect themselves
right.
from that sort of a situation.
Well, the stingers only seem to miss when they're going after our main characters. No, everyone else, perfect aim. Our main characters, 0% aim.
That's true.
but, but
Yeah, no,
sorry, on that theme, like, again, like going back to that scene with Gus getting arrested at the end, why are the cops arresting people when vampires are murdering people in the streets? Like, at that point, the cops should be engaged in an all-out firefight with the murderers in the street. And if the case is that the cops weren't aware that is happening, the previous scene was two women screaming and running past Gus and Felix. Like, there is chaos in what I believe was like Times Square. Like, this is like the heart of New York City. There is utter chaos. People are being murdered by vampires who shoot out giant tongue appendages into people's necks. Like thousands of people witnessed that. And yet the cops are still arresting civilians, non-vampire civilians, because of this. Like, I don't.
yeah, the timeline in the strain is all kinds of messed up.
Yeah.
Like
I,
the things that have been happening, all kinds of messed up.
is it that way in the book?
No, absolutely not. No,
Oh.
everything all happens at once in the book. And
Oh.
well, like, remember, we're on the third. What are we at? The third or the fourth night now? We're on the fourth night
Yeah.
after everything has happened. Um, and that's the thing that I took the biggest issue with was like people. We talked about this in last week's episode. Like, I would just be like a mess if my internet wasn't working.
Yeah.
So people aren't really reacting to that the way that I think that they should.
No.
And I just don't get a good sense of time or a good sense of like how events are occurring or where it's important. Like the FBI showing up to get Nora after she takes a nap after being like attacked by vampires at an old people's home. Like, I would think Nora's first thought wouldn't be like, I mean, go to my house and take a nap. You know,
Yeah.
like that was a huge struggle. And then like, you know, and then we don't know exactly his timeline of like why he showed up at the house, and then the police get him. But like, and then the eclipse is happening. It's just like everything feels like, what time of day is it? Why is Sears manager Matt and Zach, like, why aren't they at work and school respectively? Like,
Yeah.
what, like, there's just not a strong sense of like the way that things are happening. And you're right. You're so right about like nobody walked into the old folks home and went, hey, they're all not here.
Right.
There's blood everywhere. Like, what should we do?
Right. And by the way, with all communications being down, as that opening cold open shows, radio apparently still alive and well. Apparently everyone's still doing their radio broadcasts, no problems. Just cell phones and the internet down. You'd think that in terms of communication, that might be useful.
Yeah.
Considering the vampires apparently had a giant blind spot for all radio. So,
Well, but I think that the thing that they didn't explain correctly is that the blackout is mostly in New York. Like
oh,
it is centralized so that they can't get anything out. Things are still coming in. But that doesn't make any sense now because F's face is all over the news.
right.
So that's actually like
You're out. I think you really nailed it. F is on TV.
oh, I just blew my own mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some issues,
This is
dude.
real flimsy. Like you're not gonna believe it, but the scene set up by a 2-minute introduction of a hot blonde named Dutch Velders doesn't hold water like 3 episodes down the road. like, like shock of shocks. That scene was hastily constructed and did not coincide with what's happening in the world as we're seeing it now.
I'm really sad right now, Kyle.
Yeah, this is.
I enjoy the show. We talked about this last week. I enjoy watching the show. This is a
Yes.
very watchable show.
That's what I.
But when we try to construct the timeline, especially, but I think this episode is the most problematic
It is.
thus far.
This was-
it's interesting because I enjoyed it immensely,
Yeah.
but like it's so problematic.
I think you're going to agree with me that this was the worst episode yet. This was
Yeah.
This was a really tough episode. This is the first time where my enjoyment was seriously bothered by how stupid
Yes.
the show is. Because frankly, it's
Yeah.
I should say how stupid the storytelling is. Because
Yeah.
I mean, and I wrote in my review, the saving grace is that the pacing is always breakneck. Like we're always like I don't mean like how fast the apocalypse is occurring, but the structural episode scene to scene pacing is really good. The show never bogs down the way a lot of shows do, where you have like a long like dialogue sequence. Like The Strain will have a dialogue sequence, but we'll follow that up with like a horror sequence always. We never have like a 25-minute stretch on The Strain where people are sitting in a prison talking to each other about life and humanity. It's always like 3 minutes on that, and then vampires, and then 3 more minutes of Matt, the Sears manager, being an idiot, and then vampire. There's
Right.
the show really has a sense of how to be entertaining, and it has no sense at all of how to tell a story on TV in 60 minutes.
It does not have a script supervisor, which are the people who make continuity happen. Like it's
Yeah. It needs a storyboard. Like these episodes. I feel like if you put all these events that happened in these episodes, all the beats of every episode into a big bowl, and you tried to storyboard them out and like spread them across these 6 episodes, I feel like the most efficient way to do that would be drastically different than the way that the show has done that. Like just the way the order in which things are occurring, like you said, like it should have been. I don't like the gradual unveiling of the apocalypse. I think it should have been a single event that occurred over 1 or 2 episodes where there was utter chaos, as opposed to this thing where there is chaos in some ways, but then in other ways life is going on as normal. People are being arrested, people are being interrogated. Like it should just be like chaos is happening. This is going on. Like instead of this thing where F knows 4 episodes before anyone else does.
Well, and that's what I'm really, really hoping for next week's episode. And I because again, I had to choose to be silent earlier in this podcast because everything that you were saying, I had an answer to.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really, really because once the eclipse happens, the eclipse covers the sky and it lets them come out of the sewers while everybody is out.
Yes, we saw that.
So, we saw that happening. I'm not spoiling anything. That is when the chaos begins. That is when what you're talking about is going to happen. But it probably should not have taken us 6 episodes of flimsy character development, to get us to care about our characters in order to get us to that chaos. You know what I mean?
I have no problem with that happening in episode 6. I just have a problem with that happening, again, with the previous night. People were eaten by vampires. Are we not acknowledging that? Is not the entire day's news cycle devoted to that? It's just, I just have a problem with what happened on the previous nights, and how in this episode again, like, I wish it would have all been one episode. I wish that, like, this eclipse would have. I wish this episode would have ended right before the eclipse happened. Like, maybe into that scene where Kelly and Zach are wearing their 3D glasses and looking up at the sky. That would have been a.
Which I liked. I
Yes,
liked that.
I liked that too, and I really like the quiet Kelly and Zach scenes. I like when they don't talk a lot. Once they start talking, then it starts to get trouble. But when they're just like mother and son, then I really start feeling that relationship a little bit. And I wish the episode would have ended on that quiet note, as a sort of tell, saying like, buckle up. Next week, the eclipse, it's all going down. Like, the Strain, if the Strain was even a little bit confident in its own storytelling, that's what they would have done. Because not every episode needs to end. You know, it's so awkward to me to cut this episode off mid-eclipse. You know, like,
Yeah.
one guy's already rampaging the streets. He's been brought down. Gus is there. Like, couldn't that have been the cold open to next week's episode?
That certainly should have been the
Right?
cold
That would have been an incredible cold open, and then we just launch into this chaos, and we get an hour of chaos, and it would have been like the best hour of TV this year, and it still might be. But why did we get a taste of it this episode? Why not end quietly as the calm before the storm? Like, again, basic stuff, like,
I know,
clear ways to make your TV show better, and they just don't do it.
I know, it's interesting because this was the first episode where we didn't have like a great final 10 minutes.
We were supposed to. I mean, the guy rampaging through the streets and F escaping the FBI and all that. Like, they were.
By the way, though, F escaping the FBI as the guy hands him the keys, anticipating that F will save his life, and F choosing to walk away. You didn't like that? No?
I mean, fine, whatever. Like, that FBI agent was.
No.
Yeah.
Not about the FBI agent. Like, F. That character moment for F.
Oh, yeah.
That's an important moment for that character.
Well, I mean,
that was.
Mm-hmm.
No, I thought that Corey Stoll's performance there was excellent. Like, I thought I could see in his face, yeah, I have to leave this guy to die. Like, that critical decision and that twinge of regret, but full understanding that if he stayed, that would be like what would kill him. Like, it was such a subtle, small moment, and like. I love Corey Stoll. You and I talk about this a lot. We love this actor, and it's he has these little reactive moments where he has the opportunity. Like, I talked about it the other week when he was doing the autopsy on the pilot vampire. It's just like, whenever he gets a little moment to give us like some insight into how he portrays his character outside of just being the all-knowing middle-aged white guy, like the problematic smart guy who nobody listens to, and since you don't listen to him, the world's gonna end.
Yes.
He seems to have these little moments with the character of F that I really like. You can see, we've talked about this before, that he's an actor. Like, this is his craft. He's not just a pretty face who's doing this because he got cast because he was pretty. I really love that little.
That's a very eloquent way to put it, and I agree with everything you just said, and I think you're right. That moment was better than I'm giving it credit for. I guess the whole time I just thought he was going to let him die. Like, until the second viewing, I didn't even realize that he was making a choice. But that might have been because I was tweeting while I was watching it the first time. But you're right, and I think it is a tribute to Corey Stoll that this is the first time we've really talked about him on the podcast since like the very first episode before anything aired, because he is doing really good work on this show with pretty limited material to work with, or troublesome material to work with. I think he is giving a complicated performance in a character and adding a little bit of weight to that character. He as keeping with the theme of everything good about this show being undermined, he is undermined by his wig, of course. It's hard to take him seriously when he's wearing a ridiculous wig, but his performance is really, really good at the center of the show. And I should say, I gave the pacing credit for the show being watchable. I absolutely should have given Corey Stoll credit too, because were this the lead actor of, say, Tyrant, this show would be utterly unwatchable. If this guy was wooden, if the lead of this show was wooden, the strain would have already been canceled. I'm saying it right now. This show would be an absolute disaster with a wooden actor at the middle of it, because then it would really exacerbate every problem the show has. But Corey Stoll is sort of like holding the ship together with glue and duct tape. You know, he powers his way through these scenes of sort of questionable material and makes them work through sheer force of Corey Stollness.
Well, and I don't think he's the only one, though.
No, you're right.
We didn't
Yes.
we didn't get to touch on this earlier because we haven't gotten to the end of Vass's story. But Kevin Durant, I think is his name,
Yes.
who plays Vasily, pays a visit to his father and has a very well done moment, a very well done scene where he's a fan favorite character. He's built to be a fan favorite character. He's certainly my favorite character in the books.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets this opportunity that we get some insight into his character that I don't think we've gotten for any other character in the show.
100% agree. Yes, that little piece of exposition where his father says you turned down a scholarship at Cornell to become a rat catcher. It's like, I get it. I know who Vass is. That's all I needed. I needed 2 seconds of exposition. Would that have been so hard for Nora? It's like that's it. I get, just like I got the Fixer last week. It's like, I get who that character is. I know who he is. I now know who Vass is thanks to that scene with his father.
Yes. Well, and also I think the performance of Kevin Durant.
It's a great performance.
I think he's doing a great performance as Vass. And the dialogue was written well. We got a little bit of exposition that was just enough for us to understand this character and understand his motivations and how he's going to function in the rest of the series. And you're right. If we had gotten that for Nora, that would be great. That we're sort of I think we're kind of sloppily getting it with Abe.
We're meandering our way around it for Abe.
Yeah, which is interesting because we did get some of his Nazi material, but it certainly wasn't all it could have been.
Has he just been a dormant pawn shop owner for 50 years now? Is that?
No, there's a lot of.
There's
stuff
more backstory. Okay.
There's a lot of stuff we haven't dealt with Abe that you get cold open at the beginning of the book. So so it's very interesting to go in going, wait, where is it?
I don't have too many problems with Abe because he's pretty clear what his role is, and I actually one of the things that you might think I would criticize about this episode is Abe going into that vampire den and then having heart problems and having to retreat, which seems like kind of a silly thing to say, just sort of convenience. But I like that because it answers the question of why Abe can't just take care of this himself. Why he needs help. And there was a subtle little thing about this episode, the parallel of Abe and Ikehurst, where Abe needs to recruit these people to help him because he can't kill the he's too old to kill the vampires himself. He has heart problems. We saw this episode why he can't just go and behead every single one himself because otherwise he's such a badass and he knows everything obviously, so you would think he could just take care of the problem. Similarly, Ikehurst, I understand why he needs to recruit Jim Kent and Gus and I guess Felix now, although he wasn't planning on Felix, because he can't go out during the day. And so he needs, even though what he needed this episode seems a little silly to me, but I understand him having a need for errand boys to do things during the day. Because the vampires' one weakness is they can't be out during the day. And so it's I get that sort of, those two things I got from this episode, that they are two sort of guys who know everything that's going on, both need help, and that sort of creates the reason why a lot of stuff is happening. So I appreciated that and thought that worked about this episode.
Yes, they're both characters of incredible strengths and of incredible weaknesses.
Yes, right.
And
yeah, this episode conveyed that, and I should give it credit for that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you saw the parallel between the two because those are the fighting forces, the opposing forces.
Oh, they've been paired off because Abe doesn't have Abe doesn't have any family that we've met so far, so it's pretty obvious that his family is Ikehurst. That he's his role on the show is is the way that F has been sort of paired with his Zach and Kelly and Matt off to the side, and like Nora has her mother, like every Vass had the receptionist, and now he has his mother and father, although we didn't meet his mother. Abe doesn't have anyone, and so obviously Ikehurst is his pair.
Right. Which, a different kind of pair.
Right,
yes,
but it's sort of the same way that F and Matt are set up, just on a bigger scale.
Right.
you know,
much
but
bigger
they're
scale.
like when the show breaks off and they sort of go from storyline to storyline. Abe's storyline pair is Ikehurst, and
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the way that it is for the Goodweather family.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
I think we dug pretty deep.
yeah.
Uh,
This was a tough one. This made me a little worried about the show's future. I'm not gonna lie.
no, I will say it too, and it's so funny. I've said this in every episode, but I strongly believe that a movie or a TV show that is based off of a book should always veer away from the book material because it gets boring and you can't make a perfect translation. But there were, I will say this, it's spoiler free, but I think that there were a lot of missteps as the eclipse began. That there were a lot of missteps that could have been corrected and were laid out. There was track there already in the books, and I didn't feel. I felt that they are struggling, as I keep saying, they are struggling to bring our characters together, and they are struggling to get the stakes high enough soon enough,
yes.
and that they really messed up that scene. And I do hope that next week's episode will be, the pure and utter chaos that we're
Yes,
hoping for.
and that's what I've been waiting for, honestly, for 4 weeks now, which is the episode where everything goes to hell. And I think what I'm reacting to negatively is that it's sort of going to hell piece by piece, and that doesn't seem at all how things would happen. Like not even how
Yes.
things would happen. That's not a satisfying way for things to happen. To have to
Mhm.
watch a 10-minute story of the FBI investigating F as people are being eaten. That's a
Yeah.
real tough thing to do, and it seems so avoidable, so imminently avoidable for that to happen. Have the scene happen last week, and then the FBI guys get a call during the interrogation, maybe right before they smack F across the face, about how they're getting reports of an old age home, of a mass murder in an old age home, and they have to rush away, and they put an F in a cell. And then it's like, oh, these characters recognize that something bigger is happening, and
Right.
then F is like trying to convince them and telling them, and they're still not believing him. But then we have the same beat where he sort of tricks them into exiting the place so that he can take them to do something.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know anything about television, but I feel very, very confident that I could lay out these episodes more effectively than the Strain has. Like,
Yeah.
very confident.
I think you were very, very correct earlier, though. I think ultimately the conclusion we have to come to is that they are trying to lay the authority figures of the
Yes.
world out to be as incompetent as humanly possible.
Which is
Um,
not something that's necessary to the long-term apocalypse storytelling, because once the world
no,
falls, they are no longer authority figures. And so this,
exactly.
yes,
They could be effective, and then every system that they put into place falls apart, and that would be so much more gripping than for us to go, well, yeah, of course they all died. Look, they didn't know how to do anything.
wouldn't it
uh,
be more
yeah.
relatable? It's just kind of awesome to have a scene where there is a massive outcry because a video of vampires got posted to YouTube of like
Yeah.
old age home killing. Like, we see vampires with things coming out of their mouths, and then the police trying to restore order, and the president is like, to use another 24 analogy, the president is like President Palmer, like a strong, smart leader who recognizes that something is terribly wrong but doesn't know what to do about it because the situation is so out of control, and so it's so foreign. And so he tries his best and deploys the National Guard, and it just doesn't work because the
Yeah.
vampires are overpowering them. What a Can someone tell me one reason why that wouldn't be 1,000 times more satisfying than
Yeah.
having everyone in power be a complete buffoon and humanity's downfall being its own fault? Like, how is this in any single way more satisfying than watching humanity put up a fight? I don't get it. Like, I don't understand what the purpose of it is, because it has no long-term implications. Whether it's humanity's fault or not, humanity is going to fall. and none of these authority figures are going to matter in a few episodes. So why aren't we making this fun instead of making this into a hand-wringing session about how we should blame humanity for its own downfall?
I mean, I'm trying to frame this as best as I can. They need, in the show especially, I feel that they needed everybody to be incompetent because, as you've seen, F's face is all over the news, and they're spreading some things about him, that he's wanted by the FBI, that he's a fugitive, and they are sloppily trying to set up a scapegoat, and they are very like in the books, F being set up is so much more interesting. It's so much more interesting.
Right.
And seeing it just as being, oh, they're so incompetent, so of course they would blame the guy who gave the press conference at first, and of course it would be the CDC, like
Right.
the director of the CDC. Like, it's a sloppy way of saying because they're idiots, they're blaming him for it, instead of it being more like, oh, it's been orchestrated so that F gets blamed for it. And that's terribly unsatisfying.
Well, you bringing that up makes me remember that at some point, I think when F breaks into his wife's house and tells her she has to go, he says, "I'm being made a scapegoat," which is the only mention of that entire thing you just said in this episode.
Right, exactly.
But,
like,
yeah,
he has been made to be a scapegoat. His face is on the news, but
we don't know anything about that.
It's in the background, and we're not dealing with it, and it's like so important. Like, and I'm sorry if that's a spoiler, but
No,
that's
it shouldn't be.
It's so important that F is a scapegoat in the world.
Well, and I mean, we got this scene that occurred in a boardroom where Eichhorst murdered the CEO of the airline company. Why didn't we get a scene in the boardroom where the director of Health and Human Services, the woman who's in Palmer's pocket, who has been portrayed as one of the biggest idiots I've ever seen on television in her limited screen time, and then followed closely by F's direct boss, who has also been just portrayed as an absolute groveling, sniveling dummy. Why didn't we see those two very like a scene where they go over again the very important piece of exposition which Palmer gave, which is that the cover story, the assumption that they are operating under is that the military accidentally released a poisonous gas on this plane and everyone died. They believe that to be the true reality of the situation. Never mind the fact that people are being murdered on the streets. We'll get to the timeline again. As you said, the timeline is messed up. But if this had occurred like 3 episodes ago where they were saying, okay, the military released this thing, we cannot let that get out because it would reflect very poorly on our military. So we're going to frame F as the guy whose fault this is. And then like lay out a plan of how to do it. And we saw that plan be enacted over the course of a few episodes, and it's working, but then vampires attack and it suddenly turns out that F is right. Like, isn't that a more satisfying arc? Like, doesn't that make everyone look better and make F a sympathetic character?
That's basically how it happens
in the book. Of course it is.
I mean, it's not as much the authority figures as Palmer. It's more of a dialogue sequence between Palmer and a government figure. But yeah, it's very much just like, this is the guy, go get him.
That's so easy though. Like, that's it. Yeah, that's even more infuriating because they already know what the answer is. they created this problem that they already know what the answer is, and they somehow cut it out. Like, again, every aspect of this show is so fixable.
Yeah, you could have even just had Palmer pointing at the guy on the screen when he's talking to the director and going, "You see that guy? That guy's to blame.
That guy is to blame. The military gave me a secret memo that guy is the real." Like, it's like that's 3 seconds of screen time. That's all we need.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I didn't realize that that's what I was really upset about in this episode, but that's what I'm really upset about this episode. Yeah. I was really obviously upset with the FBI agent striking F, and I was kind of confused about like their reasoning for keeping him. It's because I didn't quite fully put it together until you just said, like, he says to Kelly, they're making me a scapegoat. Like, I didn't quite put it together. This is actually the moment where F is a scapegoat. Like, this is not gonna get deeper later. We already
moved past it.
Like, this is it. It's over. And in the books, it's like they have to go. I'm sorry, but like they have to like hide in alleys and stuff because
Ooh,
people might see them. It's like
that sounds
this
fun.
big. It's this big mystery, like where he has to hide from the authority figures and he has to hide from the general public because they're all looking for him and they all blame him.
And
And
by the way, if that had happened, if like most of the vampire material, like the public vampire material, the old age home, that scene, the vampires in the sewers, all that, like if the vampire stuff was just confined to our 4 survivors, if only their families knew about it and there was no reason to expect it to be widespread yet, and then what carried the previous episodes leading up to this one or last week's was the idea that F was being persecuted and framed, and that was the main story, and the vampire stuff was just sort of in its own story. That is a sensible and logical progression. That is totally sensible, and then it all comes to a head in this eclipse night when F gets caught and he looks like he's screwed, but then all hell breaks loose. And it's like, that, based on your explanation, seems to be how it happened in the book, and I don't understand how it didn't happen like that on the show. How did it not? You wrote the book, Guillermo del Toro. You wrote the effing book. How did you screw up your own book?
oh, you're so upset. I'm so sorry. You're very much right. You're very much right. And it's
This
very
is amazing. I'm 1,000 times more angry now that you told me that the book actually makes sense. I've been operating for these first 5 weeks under the assumption that you read a bad book and thought it was good. I should be honest. I thought the book was like kind of like True Blood, where it's campy and fun, and I understand why people like it, and certainly understand why you like it, and weren't judging you. But I thought that, like, in terms of like just it being a work of fiction, it was bad because the show struggles with storytelling and a book is storytelling. So I just sort of made that connection. But now this has opened my eyes to the fact that the book might be really good and the show, made by the same people who wrote the book, might be doing a very bad job at adapting it.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's happening. And I'm sorry that you thought that I liked a bad book, but I like a good
Listen,
book.
I know you like True Blood, and so that sort of put me in the zone to come to that leap, you know.
I'm not going to discuss this much on the podcast, but I like lots of other books. I just happen to have read the books for True Blood and also enjoy the show for True Blood. I've also read plenty of other literature.
Oh yeah, comic books and no, I'm kidding.
Oh wow, you're just asking for people to get angry at you right now. Everybody, come to my defense.
Oh no! First, every week I take shots at The Walking Dead, and now I'm talking about comic books in general. And in an episode where all I did was rag on the strain, like I can't help it if people hate me. I really try not to be hated. People end up hating me, and now I get it.
It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. You know what? This is a good transition. We continue to get fan letters. Yes. Thank you, everybody.
We still have fans, thank goodness.
Yeah, we still have fans. We still have lots of listeners. Thank you guys so much. The numbers keep getting higher. We're so excited. And we got a fan letter from Johan, who is very enthusiastic about talking
number one fan, I'm going to say so far.
Yeah, he sends us a lot of emails.
I do want to give a shout out on Twitter to Val McHugh, who is one of our favorite. I hope I'm saying her name right. She's another thing that I've only read. I've read it 1,000 times, never said it out loud. She is someone who tweets at us a lot and listens to our podcast regularly. So shout out to her. Yeah, but Johan sent us a letter.
Yes, he did send us a letter, and he was very excited to talk to you, Kyle, about lots of things.
Yeah, he's I think he's in my camp a little more, although my head is scrambled after going on that Guillermo del Toro rant. I'm trying to remember what Johan sent me.
See, how you're feeling about the strain right now is how I felt about Pacific Rim, and we're not going to argue about it on the podcast because we've argued about it enough.
We're not going to talk. We're not going to get into this. Although, if we have like 2 more episodes like tonight's, then these podcasts are just going to become me and you debating Pacific Rim. Because like we need to pull up. We need to pull up out of this tailspin right now.
Yeah. Okay. Right out. We're out. Okay.
Yeah. Johan, I think was like me, is someone who is a little bit bothered by the certain events on the show.
And the way that Nora's portrayed, I think he's particularly bothered by Nora.
Which you have come around to. Now we are all bothered. We are 3 musketeers of being bothered by Nora.
It's true. It's very true. But we encourage everybody, thank you, Johan. We encourage everybody to go ahead and send us some fan letters. You can send us fan letters at thestrainpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is thestrainpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll be happy to respond to you or give you a shout out on an episode.
And sorry, tacking this on, improvising it, but if anyone posts their own review to this episode on showratings.tv, just find the strain on the homepage. Like there's a search bar at the top. If you type in the strain, it'll take you right to this episode page. Then hit just add comment, and you can write however long you want. You can write one sentence, you can write 3,000 words, you can write 50,000 words like Blair and I have just spoke about this episode. And then you can give it a little rating on the bar to the right. It's really cool. Like you can read my review right there on that page. You don't even have to click away from it. Yeah, we will reference any reviews that are submitted. So please submit reviews. We'll talk about you. We'll plug whatever you want us to plug. Go to that website because both Blair and I are involved in it.
Yes, and I also do want to give a shout out to the Masters Minions, which is a really cool fan site.
Not going to be happy with us after this episode.
Oh, I'm sure we can reconcile. But the Masters Minions has been a very supportive Twitter handle. It's one of the biggest fan sites for the strain out there. It may actually be the biggest. And the person who runs it is pretty cool. So big shout out to them.
Big shout out. We are sorry. We're sorry for spending this entire episode talking about negative things.
We covered some.
We did.
It was not the best episode. I think we agree with that, and I think that if anything, all of our Twitter followers agreed with that as well. So
I think so. Yeah.
But if you really liked this episode and you think that we didn't we oversaw something, or you just have a very strong opposing opinion, let us know.
Please. I would love nothing more than someone to write on showratings.tv a review of why this episode was good and why this show works. And I would love nothing more than to be proven wrong. So please, if you hate listened to this episode of the podcast, put it in writing. Give Blair and I something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys again so much. This wraps up our 7th episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our shows at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to this show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod, and Kyle and I at @BlairLovesTV, and remember, that's Blair with an E, and @KyleLovesTV. Check out our website, showratings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.